You're listening to The Crypt, and joining me on the show is Dr Jenny Butler, a folklorist and lecturer from UCC, who is here to talk all about Halloween and Samhain. So you're very welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thanks very much.
Well, Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, is a Christian holiday for remembering the dead, but it was quite possibly influenced by the Celtic festival of Samhain. So could you talk about that connection?
Yeah. Well, Halloween is a festival that falls on October 31st, and it very likely has its foundations in the Celtic festival of Samhain. And there are various traditions and themes connected to the ancient Samhain that endured right through time into what we know as Halloween. So in the Irish language, Iha Hauna is the name for Halloween night, and the word Samhain is derived from the Old Irish language for the festival, so it's still used in modern Irish to refer to the month of November. So both those feasts, the ancient Samhain and the modern Halloween, are connected with the dead, and they take place on the same calendar date. So in the Gaulish or Caligny calendar, there was the Simonius festival, and that began the pastoral year. So the last evening of October was Old Year's night. So the word might be a linguistic inversion of the Irish language term saura for summer. So Samhain might mean summer's end. So there's two root words, Sav, which is summer, and Fuan, which is end. So Samhain was the festival that marked the new year for the Celtic peoples. So the celebration, we can speculate that the celebration was kind of like New Year's Eve would be today for people, so a party. So it was a time of transition or liminality. So it's a dangerous time because it's between the two halves of the Celtic year, so summer and winter. So there's a lot of magical and otherworldly associations with this night. And it's thought that the Celtic festivals began on the eve of the specific day of celebration. So even with Halloween now, it's on the 31st through November 1st. So you celebrate in the darkness. So it's thought that the Celtic peoples measured their day from the dusk or the evening, rather than how we measure days. Kind of think of how many days away something is. So that's why it starts on the evening. And the eve, or the evening, was archaically spelt even or een. So that's why you sometimes see Halloween has the apostrophe. So then the connection with Christianity is that there's the festival of All Hallows Day, or it's also called Hallowmas or All Saints Day, which is on the 1st of November. And Hallows is an older word for holy. And sometime in the 1700s, All Hallows Eve became shortened or contracted into the word Halloween. So you have the Christian festival of All Saints on the 1st of November, and then you have All Souls Day on the 2nd of November. And for All Souls, Catholics pray for the faithful departed, or the souls of the dead. So it's a time for remembering the dead for Christians, and that links up the older festival of the dead. So both times, Samhain and Halloween, are for remembering and honouring the dead.
And what were the traditions that people would follow during the festival of Samhain?
Well, many customs have to do with this idea of the dead, remembering the dead. And it's believed that the souls of the dead return on this night. So deceased relatives could come back to the place where they once lived. So it's not just distant ancestors, it could be people in your family, and some people used to leave the doors unlocked in Ireland on that night. So it's not as scary. I think people are very afraid of this idea now of the dead coming back. But I don't think it was so frightening. It was more like a welcoming back of So there's the contemporary custom as well of hollowing out pumpkins and carving creepy faces on them and putting a candle in them. And that's a continuation of the tradition of doing the same thing with sugar beet or turnip. So these are called jack-o'-lanterns. And pumpkins aren't native to Ireland, so they came in later. So some people have suggested that this custom is to do with lighting the way for the souls of the returning dead. And this is something found in folklore connected to Christmas as well, for example, to, putting a candle in the window to light the way for Mary and Joseph. So it's something you find in a lot of different festival traditions. As well, the night of Samhain is when it's believed the barrier between the human world and the other world, or the spirit realm, becomes thin, so that the dead, but also other spiritual beings, can kind of mingle with human beings. So people would dress up normally as ghosts. That tradition of guising or dressing up is something that's continued on as well, right to the present day. And there's one theory that changing your appearance or dressing up as a ghost might protect you from being recognized by the dead, because the spirits that are supposed to be around included what are known in Irish tradition as the unhappy dead. So there's a fear of past grievances or wrongs done by the living to the dead person while they'd been alive, so that you had to disguise yourself, done anything wrong to somebody who died. So there's another theory about that, that the wearing of costumes is an acknowledgement of the spirits of the dead being close, so it's more of a celebration of the dead being around.
And then, were there any sites in Ireland that were prominent in the celebration of Samhain?
Well, one site that's associated with Samhain is the Hill of Ward, or Tlachtaga, which is near Athboy in Meath. And there are legends that Druids gathered there to light big fires or bonfires as a signal that festivities should commence. The different hills in Meath, M-I-D-E, there was a fifth province of Ireland, which is the sacred centre, and there's some connection between the different hills. So there was probably some kind of ritual procession where the first fire was lit at Tlachtaga, and then fires were lit at the Hill of Tara. So it's not recorded in much detail, but we know that they're special hills. So there's archaeological evidence that huge fires were lit on Tlachtaga in ancient times, and it might have been to mark the beginning of winter. So another site is the Hill of Tara. It's also in the modern county of Meath, and that's also a significant Samhain site. And in ancient Ireland, there were references in the medieval manuscripts to Feis Taurach, which means the Feast of Tara, which was said to be held 3 days before and 3 days after Samhain.
Yeah.
So it's like we can tell something from the archaeological and the mythological sources, but it's difficult to say, with certainty what rituals occurred on those hills at Samhain. But we do know that they had some kind of religious significance, and the lighting of bonfires is probably a sacred thing as well, but it also had a practical function, because the word bonfire is derived from bone fire. So it's at Samhain, that's the traditional time to decide which animals would be slaughtered, which ones the farmers would keep and feed through the winter. So when the people would feast on the meat, and then the carcass would be thrown on the fires. So the bonfires also had that function, and people would light bonfires in Ireland right up until modern times, but it's more regulated now.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the Druids there. Could you tell us a bit about the Druids and what were their beliefs surrounding the feasting?
Yeah. Well, the Druids were the priesthood of the Celts, and they feature prominently in Celtic mythology. In regard to their beliefs connected to the Feast of Samhain, or their beliefs generally, it's hard to say because we've so little specific information on their belief system. We're told that the Druids followed an oral tradition, so they didn't write their beliefs down. But what was written down about them was either from classical sources, so you had the Greek writers, or you had the Christian scribes who compiled the mythological texts. So we've relatively little information that specifically relates to the observance of Samhain, but we can tell from mythology that it was a time that was very important, and we can surmise that the Druids were involved in the ritual activities connected to Samhain at Tara and at Tlachtaga, those hills that I mentioned. So there was perhaps some ancient ritual practice connected to symbolically mourning the death of summer, marking the start of winter. So the end of one year and the transition into the new one is this liminal kind of dangerous time, as I said, but it's also joyful. So we can kind of guess and speculate that it might have been rather like New Year's Eve is today.
In Celtic mythology, we always hear about the other world. So could you give an explanation as to what the other world is and where it's said to be located?
The other world is a term used to describe the spiritual world, which in Celtic mythology is interconnected with the natural landscape. So you have the spiritual and the physical somehow mixed together. So it's where the Sidhe, which are the fairies, and deities and other entities reside. So in both the Irish and the Welsh mythologies, the other world is located either on an island or underneath the earth. So the fairies, or Sidhe, are believed to reside in the mounds or the fairy hills and fairy forts or ring forts. In Irish myth, you also have Dawn, which is the god of the dead, reigning over a place called Chalk Dún, the House of Dawn, which was supposed to be either on or underneath Bull Island, which is located off the Beara Peninsula in the southwest of Ireland. And in folklore, caves are believed to be an entrance to the other world, or going underground into the mounds. And maybe because of the shape of caves, they connect the underground with the overground, but also symbolically they are liminal, or they're in between spaces. So there's this idea that you can somehow access the other world through caves, and there are beliefs all around the world in different cultures about an underworld or a mystical world that you can access via cave systems. So we also have this belief in the Celtic mythology. So this underworld is often associated with death, or the afterlife, or the journey that the soul has to make on its way to the afterlife. So also you have the idea of Tír na nÓg, or the land of youth, which is described as being across the ocean somewhere or under the ocean. And you have islands like High Brazil, which disappear and reappear. So either under the ground or under the sea, or maybe both, is the location of the underworld, or the other world.
And then finally, before I let you go, witches. There's so many misconceptions as to what the Wiccan religion is. So could you give an explanation, just to clarify their beliefs and so forth, so people don't think they're sacrificing babies under trees?
I mean, there's so much misconceptions, as you said. I think a lot of it has to do with horror films.
That's it.
So I'll just briefly explain what Wicca is. It's a pagan mystery religion, which was founded by Gerald Gardner, who lived from 1884 to 1964. So he founded what's called Gardnerian witchcraft. This began as a new religion in England in around the late 1930s. And that began to emerge publicly then in the 1940s. And it spread fairly rapidly once the Witchcraft Act was repealed in 1951. So Gardnerian Wiccans based their religion on the techniques of the magical practices taught by Gardner. And there are various different Wiccan paths, but there are three main ones. So that's Gardnerian Wicca, and then there's Alexandrian Wicca, which is named for Alexander's. So this is a different kind of ritual practice to Gardnerian. And then you have a feminist or Dianic Wicca. So there are also eclectic Wiccans who'd merge various different beliefs and ritual techniques. Or they devise their own magical practices. Wiccans, they normally wear a pentagram, which is a 5-pointed star, as do many pagans. And this is worn as a necklace or a pentacle, and some people wear it as a ring. So it's rather like Christians would wear a cross. So it represents the four magical elements of earth, air, fire and water. And then you have the spirit or ether represented by the upright triangle on the top. So there are different versions of the pentagram as worn by Wiccans, and there are many other associations with the ceremonial magic and things like that as well. So Wiccans might be solitary practitioners, which means they do rituals by themselves and they're not part of a group, or they could be part of a group that practices ritual together. So a coven is the name for a ritual group of Wiccans, and people are normally initiated into a coven, though they're not always. It depends on the group. So many covens meet on the night of each full moon, so once a month. So that's 13 times in a year, and 13 is a magical number, and some groups are composed of 13 people. So these full moon meetings are referred to as esbats, and pagans generally celebrate 8 festivals or sabbats. So Wiccans would celebrate these as well. So they can be divided into the 4 major fire festivals, and then you have the equinoxes and the solstices. So the fire festivals each mark at the time when a season changes into the next. So Samhain is a big festival for them, and they celebrate Samhain. They draw on the traditional customs, but they also have their own way of celebrating. Then you also have Imbolc on February 1st, Bealtaine on May the 1st, and Lunacy on August the 1st. So this is the same structure as the traditional Irish ritual year or festivals. Then you also have the spring equinox on March 21st, and the autumn equinox on September 21st, and you have the winter solstice on December 21st, and the summer solstice on June 21st, though the exact calendar dates for the solstices and the equinoxes can vary by a day either way due to astronomical reasons. So Wiccans conduct rituals, and they have a party on each of these festival dates. So they also do rituals on other occasions, such as weddings and funerals. Pagan weddings are called hand fastings, and they do healing rituals as well. Some Wiccans do. So I should mention as well that not all pagan witches are Wiccans. There are other traditions. So a tradition or path of paganism is something like a denomination of the religion. So there's hereditary witchcraft, where the craft or spiritual knowledge is said to be passed down to particular lineages by bloodline or genetics. And then there's traditional witchcraft, which draws more on historical practices associated with wise women. These were like local healers in Irish villages and towns. And you also have herbalists and folk magic and beliefs and customs connected with early modern times. So traditional witches would draw on that. So there's lots of different kinds of witches, even within paganism itself.
But they all have the belief to do no harm.
Yeah. There's what's called, well, for Wiccans, there's what's called the Wiccan Reed, and there's a karmic law of 3, or a threefold law of magic, and the idea that if you send out magic or energy, that will come back on you 3 times. You know, if you send out something negative, that's going to come back on you.
Threefold.
So Wiccans would follow that as an ethical code when they practice magic.
Well, Jenny, that has been such a fantastic interview, so fascinating, and hopefully you'll come back on the show again another day. Thanks a million.
Thank you for having me on the show.